Art Spiegelman's impact on the artistry of comics is massive. His print legacy as one of the genre's greats assured nearly 30 years ago with the publication of his masterpiece, Mouse. But Spiegelman's larger body of work, and the artists and publications that influenced him, are just as important to understanding the technique of this Jewish master. And the Jewish Museum in New York has taken up the challenge by hosting Art Spiegelman's Comics, a retrospective. The show, which originated in France, has been adapted for a New York run that will last through March 23rd. And during a press preview this week, Spiegelman sat down with the museum's Ruth Beesch to discuss his career and artistic influences, including his childhood discovery of Mad magazine while out shopping with his mother.
Mad is what did me in, and my mother really refused to get it for me because it was just one more whim as far as she was concerned, and she was on a tight allowance from my dad. But eventually the nagging was severe enough so that I got to bring it home. And the punchline to that particular comic strip is that I studied Mad the way other kids studied the Talmud.
Later, Spiegelman would use those lessons to embark on a career in comics, an avenue whose low status in the art world attracted him because it gave him room to experiment.
And yet sometime in the 70s when I was involved in the underground comics thing, I very consciously had this thought that we have to make a Faustian deal with the culture. Comics were already no longer a mass medium, and it seemed to me that, based on having read McLuhan, when something's no longer a mass medium or technology, it either disappears or becomes art. The idea was to make this deal where comics could be accepted into libraries, bookstores, university studies, and museums and galleries. In exchange for that, artists would then be able to sneer and say, the best comics are pornographic and on newsprint, but there'd be a medium from which to say that as opposed to a steady erosion of comic books and comic strips becoming far less important than they had been 100 years earlier.
Spiegelman operated within the bounds of that bargain, using underground comics as a form of self-expression, including for his depictions of human atrocities.
I realized I was dealing with atrocity through media studies, not through my own life. And that was made possible by a very significant for me influence and cartoonist and friend, Justin Green, who really brought the idea of autobiographical content to comics. And it's what gave me permission to pursue what became the first 3-page Mouse.
That particular work plays a large part in an exhibition packed with various paneled prints from Spiegelman's long career. Curator Emily Kasdan described how visitors experience art previously meant for books in an engaging museum environment.
When you think about it, the design of the exhibition is kind of mimicking walking through a comics page, because these units, these groupings of the artwork almost kind of look like comics panels, and the headers mimic the headers in the comics page of Raw. So I think really Art kind of brought his own graphic sensibility to the design of the exhibition, and in a way maybe that makes it a little bit more of a compromise of looking at comics art on a wall versus in a book.
Today, visitors can fondly commemorate their visit to this Spiegelman show with a Raw t-shirt or a print copy of Mouse from the museum gift store. But that wasn't the case earlier in Spiegelman's career, when curating a show with imagery from Mouse was a risk.
Before it was kosher to show it, back in the very early 80s, before Mouse came out at least, 85 I would guess, there's some show of Jewish Voices, New Directions or something that Susan Goodman did, and she found out about Mouse, wanted to show some of it, and it was on display with other new work at a time where that just wasn't plausible, and my publisher was terrified that I would be like Frankenstein's monster on a town with villagers with torches, because I did a comic book about this stuff.
Kasdan put her own touch on this exhibition by highlighting Spiegelman's recent spate of work in other media.
I asked him if he would be okay with including an excerpt of the Palabras collaboration that he did, the painted glass mural that he did for the High School of Art and Design, which was just installed last fall. And it was a squeeze, but we were able to get in some drawings in the poster for Wordless, which just premiered in October in Sydney. So that it's the kind of lecture/performance that's about the wordless novels.
Highlighting those works proved just as illuminating for Spiegelman as for the many fans of his work.
I really thought I've done nothing for 8 years but retrospect, nothing. And I'd done a few little stray things, but I didn't quite realize that while that was going on is literally the same period that I was doing these 3 projects. And to have it all make sense, because I just wasn't paying attention to stepping back and saying, oh yes, he's involved in cross-pollinating his medium with other media. Oh, I guess that's what I was doing,
Art Spiegelman's Comics is on display at the Jewish Museum now through March 23rd. Reporting for the Jewish Channel, I'm Christian Niedan.